Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Welcome into another edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Today is Thursday, August 27th, and this is episode number 253 of the Baseball Podcast. I appreciate you guys listening in today. Hopefully you've enjoyed the work week here thus far. We are cruising right along, almost to the end of August here, almost to the trade deadline for Major League Baseball. We're going to get into that and much more in today's episode, starting out with Lucas Giolito's no-hitter. We're going to talk in much greater detail about that one and his performance. Then we're going to get into trade deadline conversation, news and notes, rumors, what's going on around the market as we're about 5 days away here from the deadline itself. Then we're going to talk about Cy Young MVP voting and just kind of touch base on where we're at here as of the end of August. So thanks again for tuning in. Let's jump right into it here, ladies and gentlemen. It is Wednesday as of time of recording for this episode. So last night, Lucas Giolito threw the first no-hitter during the Major League Baseball season this summer. It was the 19th no-hitter in White Sox history. But before we get into all of that stuff, the statistics about last night, what went down, I just wanted to share with you guys my experiences from playing and being involved with no-hitters. Once as a pitcher, I was never actually able to complete a no-hitter during my time. I did have multiple shutouts during my collegiate career. Actually, heading into my senior year, I was tied for second in the nation with career complete game shutouts with 2 going into that one. I shut out the University of Pennsylvania and the Naval Academy during my career, my college pitching career. But back in high school was the closest I got to a no-hitter. I went 6 1/3, no in a 7-inning game during a high school conference championship. It ended up getting broken up. I hung a breaking ball to a kid who wasn't touching the breaking ball all night, and it was inner half, and he inside-outed it down the right field line and broke up the no-no. And after an error, a couple of hits later, we still ended up winning the ball game and winning the championship. 3-2, I believe the final was there, but that was the furthest I had gotten. I had 11 strikeouts, no walks. I had hit a kid earlier in the game, so that's what was keeping it from being a perfect game through 6 1/3. But once the hit went, we had an error, a couple other hits, I was able to settle in again and get out of it, win that one 3-2. But actual no-hitters that I've been a part of on the field, there's been 2 of them. One I was playing third base, and one I was playing first base. And we'll start out with the one where I was at first base, because the third base one's a little bit better of a story for you. But during my career at Lehigh, playing first base against Lafayette, we had a left-handed kid, mid to high 80s, a lot of run on the ball, ended up throwing a no-hitter. I made a couple of nice plays in foul territory down the first base line, kind of the over-the-shoulder catch, not quite the Manny Machado in the right field corner from his third base spot during the shift, but definitely one of those where I was cruising down there. I was the only one to grab it, and we hung on, ended up winning the game, getting the no-hitter. Nothing real crazy happened in that one, but the Texas Collegiate League no-hitter that I was a part of down in the TCL, a buddy of mine named Zach Oates, he played at Northern Illinois, and he threw a no-hitter and actually lost the ball game. I have been a part of a no-hitter in which the team has actually lost the ball game. So how does that happen? You're probably asking yourself. Well, let me take you through the situation. I believe it was like the top of the second inning. Again, these are 7-inning games across the summer, double headers. But top of the second inning, we're on the road, and it starts out with a walk and a hit by pitch. Nobody out, runners on first and second. Next up, the hitter's trying to bunt, wild pitch. Runners advance to second and third, still nobody out. Next 2 batters, Ground ball to shortstop, run scores, runner to third, or ground ball to second, run scores, guy on third, 1 out. Next up, ground ball to shortstop. Runner scores, 2 outs, nobody on. We're down 2-0. We get through the second inning, haven't allowed a hit. And then we get to the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th inning. My guy still hasn't allowed a hit. And yet we look up on the scoreboard and we lose the game 2-1. Our offense wasn't able to muster anything against the opposing team's pitcher. We didn't even realize a no-hitter was going on because we were losing the game. So there really wasn't any pressure on you as a defender to try to keep the no-hitter going because you were more worried about how we're going to score some runs and win the ball game. And then it would be the top of the 7th and it's like, oh my God, can we score a run please? This guy's going to throw a no-no and actually get the loss. It was just fascinating to be a part of and something that is very, very rare. That's for sure. So I can say, hey, I was on the losing end of a pitcher who threw a no-hitter, which not many people are able to communicate. But back diving into Lucas Giolito's no-hitter, like I touched on, it was the 19th no-hitter in Chicago White Sox history. And this is a key number because it broke a tie with the Boston Red Sox for most in the American League. The White Sox now have the record at 19 for most no-nos in the American League. The Dodgers are actually the number 1 team here. They have 26, according to Wikipedia team total. So Dodgers have 26, White Sox now have 19. And if we scroll down here, one other fascinating thing I saw was the San Diego Padres are the only team without a no-hitter thus far. I would not have guessed that. Honestly, there would have been a couple of names. There's about 15 or 16 with just one. Now, a handful of them are actually live programs like the Milwaukee Brewers, Colorado Rockies, New York Mets. Then you get a lot of teams like the Pittsburgh Rebels, the Cincinnati Blues, or the Cleveland Blues, the Cleveland Spiders. But the Rays and Blue Jays are also on that list of only having one. So Blue Jays, Rays, Mets, Brewers, and Rockies only have one no-hitter, and then the San Diego Padres are the only team left with no-hitter. So Giolito threw the 19th no-hitter in White Sox franchise history. Was the first one for them since 2012. It looks like here Philip Humbrue threw a no-no for them back in 2012. That was a name I didn't remember, so I certainly don't remember those highlights or that outing for Mr. Humbrue back in 2012. It was also the 304th no-hitter in franchise history. But based on the performance, it's certainly one of the better no-hitters in the history of baseball, as I'm combining my sentences there. So as we dive in a bit further into the box score here, we learn that Lucas Giolito, 1 walk, 13 strikeouts. And he forced 6 ground ball outs, 5 fly ball outs, and then 3 line outs, so to speak, if you look into the baseball savant and kind of dive into the box score there. So the 13 strikeouts are some of the most in White Sox history in regards to the no-hitter. He was the first with double digits. Yeah, that's what I thought. I'm looking at my notes here. First White Sox no-no out of the 19 to have double-digit strikeouts. So very, very impressive performance from Giolito when it comes to the stuff and the swing and miss capability, because this was another outstanding detail that once you continue to dive into just opens your eyes on Giolito and what is going on. And he had 30 swing and misses in this outing alone. That is the second most in no-hitter history, only behind Nolan Ryan, who had 31 way back in, I believe it was 1990. So Lucas Giolito had a chance to tie that record as he was 0-2 in the top of the 9th when the last out took place. And we'll get into that last out here just a little bit because it had a hit probability of 850. It left the bat. Let's see if I can pull it up here on Baseball Savant. 2 in the 9th inning. So Giolito gave up 2 of his hardest hit balls in the 9th inning. And this one here, the line out to right field, exit velocity of 102.6 with a launch angle of 13 degrees. So the guy hit the ball over 100 miles an hour, 13 degrees launch angle, and the expected batting average or the hit probability on a ball that is hit this hard with this launch angle is 850. Meaning 85 out of 100 times, if somebody were to hit the ball at that angle and that speed, they're going to get at least a base hit. And, that's just the luck you need when it comes to kind of getting those breaks in regards to the no-hitter over the course of the 9 innings. Because earlier in the 9th, he had an exit velocity. Let's see here, Jose Ozuna, he flew out. 90 miles an hour exit velocity, but it was straight up, so it wasn't a huge hit probability. As we continue down here, there was another one that was in the 800s, and I want to find it for you guys here. Here it is. Josh Bell in the 4th inning had a line out, 106.6 exit velocity with a 9-degree launch angle. That one had a hit probability of 800. So 80 out of 100 times making contact that way, you get a hit. So basically, there were 2 balls that should have been singles, should have been hits, that the plays were made behind Lucas Giolito, which is fascinating, and it's what you need. I mean, over the course of 27 outs, not every one is going to be that easy and go the exact way you want it to go. So you get help from your defense behind you, and you get a couple of breaks throughout the game, and there you go. You get yourself a no-hitter. But looking more into kind of Lucas Giolito and his comeback and his turnaround, because he was one of the worst pitchers in Major League Baseball in 2018. He used his two-seamer a lot. Let me pull up the stats here. Let's see. I want to get you a specific ERA. 2018, 173 innings with an ERA of 6.13. 32 starts, 6.13 ERA. The guy at 23 years old basically remade himself during the offseason. Like I said, he got away from the two-seam fastball and went with kind of the new era Stratomatic high fastball four-seam in the zone. And he also changed up his delivery mechanics. If you watch Giolito, he short arms the ball a bit more to continue to hide it from the batter behind his right hip and shoulder. Him and Shane Bieber from Cleveland have kind of both been doing this, and it's different from what you typically see with a pitcher because they're taught about, swooping the arm, getting as much kind of circumference in regards to arm angle that you possibly can. And Giolito and Bieber are doing more of kind of the football motion where you come down and then you cock it straight up, but you continue to hide the ball behind your head and deceive the hitter that way. And his success has come from more or less a 3-pitch arsenal. If you look at the Baseball Savant box score, you only get 3 pitches out of him. It's a four-seam fastball, a slider, and a changeup. And the way he works the quadrants, watching him start, is the high fastball in the top 2 quadrants. You get the slider, and now he's a right-handed, so I'm going to talk about facing a right-handed hitter. You get the slider low and away to a right-handed hitter or in the lower left quadrant, and then you go changeup down and in to a right-handed hitter or away from a lefty into that quadrant. But once the ball is about halfway, they all come out of the same tunnel, same trajectory, and then you as a hitter need to decide, okay, is it the top 2, bottom right, or bottom left that's coming in here? And the rotation of the ball out of the hand is what makes it difficult because he's able to manipulate the spin to which they mimic each other extremely well. So when I was playing and when I was hitting, a lot of breaking balls you would see would come out kind of more on the 11 to 5. If you're looking at a clock, right-handed hitter, if you're a right-handed pitcher, 1 to 7 if you're staring at the clock. But now a lot of pitchers have gone to the overhand breaking ball with the four-seam spin. And that's much more difficult to pick up because the 11-5, 1 to 7 breaking ball comes with a dot as it's arriving to home plate. The way the spin is manipulated, you get a little bit of a dot, so you're able to distinguish between not and dot and no dot to say, okay, fastball or changeup or breaking ball. And with these now overhead 12-6 breaking balls, what the pitchers have done is utilize the four-seam spin. However, they spin it with the ball going forward. So now as a hitter, you can't determine dot or no dot. You need to determine forward spin or backward spin. Because forward spin will drop off, drop down, breaking ball style. Backward spin maintains its plane and its elevation high in the zone. And that's able, it's much more harder to deceive those two when there isn't a difference in regards to the rotation as opposed to forward or backwards. and sideways and that type of opportunity. So the pitchers are getting very good at deceiving the hitters this way, and it lends me to believe here we're going to see at least one more no-hitter during the 2020 season. There were 4 of them during the 2019 season. This, of course, over the course of 162 games, we had Verlander and Mike Fiers throw complete game no-nos. Then we had 2 team no-hitters with the Angels and Astros putting one together here. So 4 over 162, kind of break it down. That led me to believe 1 to 2 over the course of the first 60 games. And with Lucas Giolito establishing himself early on, it's certainly been very impressive, because Giolito now all the way down to a 3.09 ERA, and after his first couple of starts, he was up in the 8.0 world. So he's certainly figured it out over his last 2. I think he's gone 16 scoreless. So very impressive, starting to figure it out, and certainly a guy who you really don't want to see in the postseason, along with these White Sox. They keep playing good baseball. They're firmly in the playoff picture right now, potentially as that second seed in the AL Central, or even, first. They're a couple of games out, but definitely at least a wild card team. But that'll wrap things up here for the first segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We'll pause right now for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows. But when we come back, we'll get into some trade chatter. What are the rumors going on out there? Stick around and find out, everyone.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back, everybody, to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. This is episode number 253. If you haven't done so yet, do me a favor, take a second or two here, scroll up wherever you're listening to this podcast, or down, however you communicate with your thumb there. You move it up to go down, and leave us a 5-star rating, write a review. If you guys leave a review, I'll read them here on the podcast, give you guys some airtime. It'll be a lot of fun. Get your questions answered. If you guys have any questions or comments, let me know. We'll talk about those as well. Head to social media. Check out GSMC Baseball Podcast. We got a Facebook page, Twitter, as well as the GSMC Podcast Network on LinkedIn, Facebook, all across all social media platforms. We here within the network certainly appreciate you guys listening. If you could share us with your friends, that goes a long way. So jumping back into it here, the second segment of today's episode, we're talking about the trade deadline. That is coming up here August 31st on Monday. So on Sunday night's recording that we do here for you guys, we should have an update on what's going on across the league. But I wanted to keep you guys updated on all of the chatter that's being talked about across Major League Baseball in regards to some teams, some players, and who could be moved, what we're looking at here. So starting off with the Toronto Blue Jays, they find themselves at 14-14. Good enough for the final playoff spot in the American League. So they find themselves actually in the buyer's market. Apparently they've had communication with the Pittsburgh Pirates. They are looking at right-handers Trevor Williams and Chad Cole. Both are off to pretty good starts this year and are under team control through 2020. So not only would this be a short-term move for the Blue Jays, but also a long-term investment. Trevor Williams has a 3.7 ERA in 24 innings thus far, and Chad Cole has a 2.84 ERA in 19 innings. So both guys performing really well. Both guys should draw interest, not only with the Blue Jays, but across other teams as well. So the Blue Jays certainly need the rotation help. 3 of the 6 starters they've given multiple starts to this year are on the injured list, including Nate Pearson, the young up-and-coming prospect. So they need help in the rotation game. They're open to a rental, potentially Tajon Walker for the Seattle Mariners. His name will come up here once again in a minute, but he would be more of a rental as opposed to these Pirates guys who are under control a bit longer. Next up, we have the Arizona Diamondbacks. They entered Tuesday with 6 straight losses, 13-17, but only a game or 2 out of the NL playoff spot. I mean, we've talked about how the depth in the National League is not very good, so the Diamondbacks find themselves on the fence, and they don't know which way to go. But the selling part could include Robbie Ray. Some teams have shown interest in him as a relief pitcher since he's got an 8.33 ERA in 27 innings as a starter this year. So teams who acquire him would look to move him to the bullpen. But they could sell that. They could add some offense. It really depends here over the next couple of days and how the rest of the National League plays and if they really think they have a chance to make a run at a postseason bid. The Milwaukee Brewers here, they're 12-15 thus far. Disappointing start. Certainly still in the picture, but it's a bit surprising to me, but they're listening on closer Josh Hader. Hader, obviously a stud, a 0 ERA in 8 innings, a .6 whip, walks and hits per innings pitched. He is available at an extremely high price. One guy called it bananas in regards to the price that they're asking for Hader. But they're having the conversation, so it leaves the door open ever so slightly. And if somebody would come in and wow them with an offer, it could potentially be done. So he's going to make around $5 million next year. He's got 2 or 3 more years after that under team control, so they would need a monster package in regards to move on from Hader. But if they do, it would kind of show where Milwaukee thinks they are as an overall organization, and the difference between a lights-out closer 8th inning guy doesn't make that big of a difference if you can't get the lead in the first place to get to the closer or 8th inning guy. So it's a long-term investment potentially to get a few offensive prospects back, maybe some starting pitching prospects for the Brewers, as they could potentially see a downward turn here moving into the future. And Christian Yelich's start hitting about 200 here isn't a good omen to potentially what may be coming around. But let's see. Bouncing around, the San Francisco Giants. Could they actually be buyers? They had a walk-off against the Dodgers last night. It was their 7th consecutive victory, and they're now above 500. They have a 4-4 record against the Dodgers, and I think the Dodgers are like 18-5 against everybody else. So they're actually giving them a pretty good problem here early on. But the Dodgers, of course, they have pitcher Kevin Gausman, who's a pending free agent who they could look to sell. Johnny Cueto in the rotation could possibly be look to be sold. But now that you're in the playoff picture here, maybe you're a buyer. Maybe you're looking to add a rotation piece. Maybe you're looking to add a bullpen piece. The Giants bullpen has a 5.37 ERA thus far, which certainly isn't going to lend itself to playoff success. So maybe they take a swing on somebody out there in the bullpen and look to fortify things. The Tampa Bay Rays are considered to be very aggressive currently in conversations. There haven't been any player rumors, whether it's an addition or subtraction as to what specifically they're looking at here, but it has been said that they are being very aggressive in trade talks. They're communicating with a lot of different teams about a lot of different players, so it could be fascinating to kind of see which direction they find themselves ultimately going in, as we have 5 days left here before the deadline. The Mariners, of course, are going to be true sellers this year. Tajon Walker, who we touched on, no doubt will get traded, according to a league executive. He's got 25 strikeouts in 27 innings and a 4 ERA for the Seattle Mariners, so he's been good early on, which would certainly lend them to get something in return. But this is going to basically count on the money aspect of trades as well, because executives are being quoted as saying every dollar is a big deal this year. Not just millions, but every dollar is a big deal. With the economic ramifications of the coronavirus, not having fans, potentially not having fans in the future, every team is looking at the money as if it's as equal to or greater than a potential prospect. Since you can only move people on the 60-man roster, the options of return are not as great as they are during a typical season. The Atlanta Braves are looking for rotation help. They have the 26th best ERA when it comes to rotations, but also have a 91% chance to make the playoffs here, according to the graphs. So this team really struggling rotational-wise, but with the way the rest of the National League East is shaping up, they find themselves in a good spot to make the playoffs. I mean, they've had a ton of injuries. Mike Soroka, Cole Hamels, Felix Hernandez opted out, Mike Foltynewicz, Sean Newcomb, Kyle Wright. Let's see. They've all been optioned down to the minors, so this pitching staff is in current flux, and you would certainly see them look to add somebody. Now, whether it's a rental or whether it's somebody like Indians' Mike Clevinger, who's the best arm expected to be quote-unquote available. Yes, it's going to take a nice price to get Clevinger away from the Indians since they continue to make a push here and ultimately are not sellers, but will certainly be listening to try to add a piece. So I don't know if Atlanta is going to want to pull the trigger on a Clevinger style of deal, but I look to potentially Kyle Gausman or Kevin Gausman out there in San Francisco as a rental option that won't cost nearly as much. Rumors have it that the Dodgers this time are not going to make a big splash. 3 years ago it was Yu Darvish. 2 years ago, Manny Machado. Last year it was relievers, Smith, Hand. They tried to get Diaz. They couldn't get any of those guys, so they were looking for a deal last year, but ultimately couldn't get one done. And then this year it looks to be the same way. People are saying they could potentially go out to try to land another ace, but that looks unlikely. Buehler's been good. Kershaw's good. May, Urias. They have enough depth in the rotation. Trevor Bauer has potentially been rumored if they go for broke, but I don't see them giving up the ROI it would take to get him in regards to prospect pool and money. So I think the Dodgers stay put for the most part. We don't see any huge moves from them. But the Angels, do they turn into sellers? I talked about on a previous episode how with Mike Trout and all the money spent on Anthony Rendon, how could you possibly sell to your fan base that you're going to turn around and ship people out of here? But after this performance and a last place current standing in the AL West, there really is no other course of action. I mean, you have to move on from guys. You have to ship Dylan Bundy out of town. Maybe it's Andrelton Simmons, Tommy La Stella, David Fletcher, a couple of other infielders who could be moved. So I think they're going to be sellers, and I think it's unfortunate out in L.A. with Mike Trout continuing to play well once again that he just won't find himself in the postseason here in 2020. Looking at a couple of other squads we touched on it, the Cleveland Indians possibly letting go of Mike Clevinger. The other name being rumored is Zach Plesac. Are they going to move on from both of these guys who broke MLB's health and safety protocols during a trip to Chicago and then were sent home by teammates afterwards? Are they not able to integrate themselves back in the locker room? Is the front office going to have to move on from them? And both of these guys have been performing really well and have excellent stuff. So you could get a decent price in return, and it could be a win-win from a Cleveland management perspective in regards to getting rid of guys who people don't want in the locker room, as well as getting a nice return on your investment. The last team here on the list is the Boston Red Sox. People are talking about if they'll continue the rebuild. They shipped out relief pitchers Hembree and Woodruff to the Philadelphia Phillies earlier. Now the talks are Workman to not Woodruff, Workman to the Phillies earlier. But now the talks are, is Xander Bogaerts going to move? Kevin Pillar going to move? What about J.D. Martinez, Jackie Bradley Jr.? Are they going to ship all these guys out of town, or are they going to try to keep them through the rebuild? You know, what is kind of their perspective, and what is Chaim Bloom ultimately looking at here as a potential difference maker as they transition into kind of that next era of Boston Red Sox baseball? But getting away from the team style of conversation now, looking at certain players who could potentially be moved. I have a list here in front of me of guys who could be expected. We've touched briefly on some of them. Dylan Bundy, a starting pitcher for the Angels. Of course, he's 3-2, 2.58 ERA thus far. Somebody looking to get good value on the dollar could make a move for Dylan Bundy. I mentioned Johnny Cueto. He's 2-0, 4.35, but basically everybody in San Francisco's rotation. I mean, what about Drew Smyly, Kevin Gausman, Tony Watson? Any of these guys could really be available. Robbie Ray we mentioned as well. And then on the offensive side of things, you got Mike Yastrzemski, who's playing at a MVP type level. And as long as the Giants continue to find themselves in contention, I don't think they're going to move on from Yastrzemski. But Whit Merrifield, I labeled him as probably the biggest offensive fish available. He's hitting .312 with 5 home runs, 18 RBIs, and 6 steals. Has another year of team control moving forward. So I think Whit Merrifield would be the best addition this year across the board. If you don't have to give up too much, certainly it depends on the price. But I think Whit Merrifield would be the biggest prize this year for a team looking to make a true difference. So let's see. Continuing down the list, Tajon Walker we touched on. Jordan Yamamoto for the Miami Marlins could potentially be a starting pitcher who's been moved, but he hasn't been great thus far this year. Let's see here. Let's look at the bullpen pieces that could get moved. Heath Hembree has already been moved. Greg Holland for the Kansas City Royals. He's got a 2.61 ERA in 10 innings. He could find himself potentially on the move to a team like Washington. I know Philadelphia still wants bullpen help. There's a lot of guys out there. You got Michael Givens for the Orioles. He's off to a surprisingly strong start. He has yet to allow a run over the course of 8 innings. This was a name I was not too familiar with until the past couple of weeks, starting to look into names who could be moved. And you do see Michael Givens continue to pop up. You got Joe Jimenez for the Detroit Tigers. He's got a 6.43 ERA in 7 innings. He's under team control through 2023. So he's got a nice fastball in the mid-90s, but a career-high ERA, so a change of scenery could be good for him. You have Ian Kennedy, a 6.3 ERA in 10 innings. That's a name that you've known more in the past, but still could give you quality innings as a veteran here down the stretch for a younger bullpen if you're looking to add somebody with that type of style. You got Matt McGill for the Seattle Mariners. He has a 0 ERA through 8 innings. He's been on the move before, so wouldn't be a surprise to see his name once again. Richard Rodriguez from the Pirates, a 3.12 ERA out of the bullpen. He's been good for them thus far. Another name in Pittsburgh that will ultimately most likely be moved. Trevor Rosenthal, a .9 ERA in 10 innings. At this point last year, he was on his 3rd team, having been with the Nationals, Tigers, and now Kansas City. But he's turned things around and finds himself being squarely in the chatter when it comes to trade conversation here leading up to the August 31st deadline. And then some offensive gentlemen to potentially look at on the move outside of the names we've talked about. You got Jacoby Jones for the Detroit Tigers hitting .314, 5 home runs and 13 RBIs. Maybe they try to strike while the iron's hot as opposed to going off his career numbers, looking at his strong start, looking to get a return while he's performing. You have Mitch Moreland hitting .300 for Boston. He's another name they could move on from. Austin Nola, a catcher for Seattle, hitting .278 with a couple of home runs, RBIs. He's been a good offensive player for them. You have Jonathan Schoop for the Detroit Tigers, hitting .243 with 4 homers and 9 RBIs. And then Yastrzemski, Merrifield, and some of the other names we've already talked about here on the move. But, so nothing yet has really manifested itself. Nothing coming down the pike in regards to actual conversations, actual rumors outside of those Phillies moves to improve the bullpen last week. But I do think we're going to see a handful of moves. I don't think it will be as busy as a standard trade deadline, but you'll see kind of value at the margins, people like to say. So you'll see some of those bench moves, bullpen moves, depth pieces, things along those lines. But that'll wrap things up here for the second segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We'll pause now for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows. But when we come back, we'll touch on the 2020 Cy Young and MVP races. Where do the odds currently stand? Stick around, everybody. Come back to find out.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Thanks again for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. This is episode number 253. If you haven't checked out the other shows within the GSMC Podcast Network, do yourself a favor, type that into the search bar, just GSMC. You'll find all the different podcasts that pop up within the network. If you're into not just sports, but you enjoy reading books, you enjoy watching television, movies, politics, weird news, relationships, cars, whatever it is that you're into, there's a podcast for you guys out there. And if it's sports, there's a college football, fantasy football's coming up here. I know everybody's starting to do their drafts, whether it was this past weekend or upcoming weekend. There's a podcast where you can get all the intel on who you should take and when. So check out the GSMC Podcast Network, and you guys will have hours of entertainment with quality content to fill your ears. But let's jump back into today's episode. In this segment, we are talking about AL MVP, or both MVPs, both Cy Youngs, Rookie of the Years. We're looking at the current odds according to the sports books, and potentially if we could find some value out there for everybody listening. So let's start out right off the top. American League MVP odds. There are a few names, new names on here that we haven't looked at in the past couple of weeks, but the leader in the clubhouse remains to be Mike Trout of the LA Angels. However, I'm not a huge fan of this value, because when you look at Trout's line of 255 batting average, he does have 10 home runs and 25 RBIs, so he continues to hit for power. But let's see, 34 strikeouts for Mike Trout and 12 walks, and hitting 255. That's not a Mike Trout-like year, and his expectations are so high that if he does perform at that level, there's no shot he's going to get the MVP award. In second place here, a surprise for myself, was Brandon Lowe of the Tampa Bay Rays. And then pulling up Brandon's stats, he's hitting 295, 9 home runs, 25 RBIs. He is third in the league in OPS at 1051. So certainly having a strong year offensively, and the leader for the Tampa Bay Rays. And it gets back to the conversation about individual performance in regards to team success. How much weight does the team success have in the MVP race? Are you a fan of the best player on the best team award for MVP? Are you a fan of the most valuable player, where the team may be 500, but if you take the player off the team, they're much, much worse? And, maybe an example of somebody like that is Bryce Harper, who's not even on the list here when it comes to odds. Or no, wait, I'm looking at American League still. That was a National League reference here, if I could find Bryce Harper. Yeah, he's in the middle. He's 6th in the National League, but he's one where if you take him away, what do you have left? So jumping back to the American League here, the third place is you have Aaron Judge at plus 800. Aaron Judge dealing with some injury issues early on in the year, but was off to a super hot start. He's not here on the list of stats because he hasn't qualified due to games. You have Jose Abreu in 4th place for the Chicago White Sox after his recent run with the long ball. He's hitting 322, 11 home runs, and 28 RBIs, first baseman designated hitter for the Chicago White Sox. I don't know if he'll continue to stay that hot, but he's right up there in the conversation. I certainly think that at plus 950 is not a bet here. Not a bad bet here. And then these next two guys I'd also give a decent look at. You have Nelson Cruz of the Twins. Obviously, designated hitters, much more difficult to win the award, but the guy's hitting 327, 11 home runs, 27 RBIs. He's at the top of pretty much all of those categories when it comes to the American League. And then you have Luke Voit of the New York Yankees, who's leading the American League in OPS, and he's hitting 311 with 10 home runs and 20 RBIs. So it's the power hitters that are also hitting for average. You got Cruz, Abreu, Trout, Voit, all of these guys in the top 4 when it comes to home runs, and all hitting for average as well. RBIs up there too. Cruz, Abreu. So when it looks at the odds here, I don't like Mike Trout at plus 325. I don't know if Brandon Lowe will have the staying power, but if the Rays finishes the top team and outlasts the Yankees, if they have a quality guy there, it could be difficult to move on from. So I like Abreu, Cruz, and Voit at the plus 950 to plus 1100 as potentially getting quality value in the AL MVP race. Now, looking at the National League, things have changed and the odds have updated. Right now, Fernando Tatis Jr., finds himself at the top of the list for the National League. He is plus 417 when it comes to MVP odds. He is hitting .301 with 12 home runs and 29 RBIs. Leads the league in home runs and RBIs, as well as hitting .300. It's been a lot of fun to watch Tatis do his thing offensively this year. And if he keeps it up and the Padres make the postseason, he's certainly the favorite. So plus 417, I still think are pretty solid odds if you're looking to make a bet in the National League. Now, Mike Yastrzemski for the Giants, I don't know if he'll have the staying power. He's certainly been awesome early on. .293, 7 home runs, 23 RBIs, but definitely a tier below Tatis Jr., so his odds being that close, I think there's greater value with Tatis. Looking at Mookie Betts in third place, plus 567. Mookie certainly had a fantastic year here thus far, hitting .293, 11 home runs, 24 RBIs. He had the 3 home run game a bit earlier to get his name and numbers back up there. Charlie Blackmon, plus 767. We touched on Charlie Blackmon being close to that 400 club. He's now at 395, so he has very much cooled off, and I don't think he'll be back to where he needs to be in regards to, getting those low of odds. But Bryce Harper at plus 1333 is, I think, the last guy you may want to take a flyer on. Yeah, Harper continues to be fantastic. He's leading the league in OPS, hitting .321, 7 home runs, 19 RBIs. So if he has a power surge, 3, 4, 5 home runs over 5 games, finds himself up closer to the Tatis 12 and 29, I certainly think Harper could be at the top of this conversation at the end of the year. There's really nobody standing out thus far, and at plus 1333, I think Bryce is the guy you may want to put some cash on. So put some on Tatis Jr. Those are good bets. He could hit. And if you're looking for a long shot, Bryce Harper at plus 1333 is, I think, very solid money. But let's look now at the Cy Young Awards, starting out in the American League. Pulling up the names here, we have Shane Bieber, the leader in the clubhouse, at a 150 plus 150. So he only returns $150 on a $100 bet, but he has definitely been the best guy in the American League thus far. 6-0, 1.35 ERA, 75 strikeouts. By far and away the most in the American League. That number is exponentially greater than the next guy. Let's sort the stats over here to see who let's see. Giolito now next at 58. So 17 strikeouts ahead of Giolito. Garrett Cole at plus 200 for the Yankees is your second place guy right now in the American League. He is 4-0 with a 2.75 ERA in 6 starts over 36 innings, so he has been as good as advertised for the New York Yankees. Lance Lynn, a surprise at plus 500. He's 4-0, a 1.59 ERA in 45 innings. He's been fantastic for Texas, but the Rangers' overall team performance and position in the standings, I think, would make it difficult for Lance Lynn to pop over Bieber if Bieber continues to shove at the level he has. Then there's definitely a jump, plus 1,600. So from plus 500 all the way to plus 1,600 is when you get to Dylan Bundy and Blake Snell of the Angels and the Rays. So Dylan Bundy, 3-2, 2.58 ERA. Vegas has yet to jump on his staying power. Doesn't think he will continue to perform that well at that level. Then, like we said here, we have Blake Snell at plus 1,800. He's been better of late, but his ERA is still relatively high when it comes to a potential winner of the Cy Young Award. Kenta Maeda is another one who isn't on the list for odds here, but is 4-0 at 2.21 ERA and could be a long-term, long-shot investment if you're looking to make some cash on the American League Cy Young. So Shane Bieber, he's certainly the favorite. Garrett Cole at plus 200. Those odds are too high, but he would be there if Bieber falters. So I don't think there's any good money outside of Shane Bieber based on what I've seen thus far in regards to performance. But transitioning now over to the National League. Let's pull up the NL Cy Young contenders here. At the top of the list, we have Trevor Bauer at plus 375. Trevor Bauer is 3-1 with a 1.65 ERA in 5 starts thus far. He has 49 strikeouts to 9 walks. He's been very good for the Cincinnati Reds. At plus 500, you have Jacob deGrom. who continues to perform. He is 2-0 with a 1.93 ERA in 5 starts. He's really the only guy winning games for the Mets, as that rotation is really in shambles behind what DeGrom's been able to give them through his 5 starts. So he's still at plus 500. Yu Darvish has improved all the way to plus 500, and Yu's been very impressive. In 6 starts, he is 5-1, a 1.70 ERA in 37 innings. He has 44 strikeouts and only 6 walks. And honestly, that slider that he's figured out is looking more and more like a frisbee. And is it tough to hit? Oh my God. Look at some pitching ninja GIFs or tweets, and you'll find yourself going, wow, in regards to some Yu Darvish action. You have Max Fried here at plus 600 in 4th place for the NL Cy Young. Max Fried, let's see, he leads the league in ERA at 1.32 through 6 starts. He is 4-0. He's only given up 5 earned runs in 34 innings. He's a bit more all over the place. He does have 11 walks, but hasn't led to runs scored, obviously. With a run 3.2 ERA, he's been getting out of jams. Next on the list, you have Luis Castillo and Sonny Gray for the Cincinnati Reds. Both of these guys are at plus 767. Sonny Gray's 4-1 with a 2.21 ERA for Cincinnati. He is 7th currently in ERA in the National League. I think he would be a much better option than Luis Castillo, who's certainly 0-4. I mean, the record alone, he's got a 3.9 ERA, but the record of 0-4, I think, takes you out of the race. And then you kind of get to the next level of guys here. Aaron Nola, Dinelson Lamet, Max Scherzer, Jack Flaherty, all of these guys who were preseason favorites who have had good but not great years thus far, or not up to their standards. I mean, Aaron Nola, yes, he has been better than advertised, but he's 2-2 with a 3.1 ERA, so it gets into that record conversation. And once you're outside of Darvish, Fried, DeGrom, Sonny Gray, all of these guys 2-0, 4-1, you're looking at some issues when it comes to the arguments for the Cy Young Awards. So I like the top there. I like basically the favorites on both sides. Max Fried at the top in the National League, and who was it in the American League? Shane Bieber for the Indians, of course. But now looking once again here, the last little category I wanted to pull up for you guys was the Rookie of the Year voting. In the American League, we're looking at a tie ball game up at the top. We have Kyle Lewis and Luis Robert. Kyle Lewis of the Mariners, Luis Robert of the White Sox, both having fantastic starts to the season. Kyle Lewis is 2nd in the league at hitting at .360 with 7 home runs and 19 RBIs. And Luis Robert, he was off to a super hot start. He's cooled off of late, but he's hitting .284 with 7 home runs and 17 RBIs. So based on where we're at right now, Kyle Lewis, I think, would be the favorite over Luis Robert in the American League. And with both of those guys at plus 300, I think you should lean and put your money on Kyle Lewis at this point in the conversation. Next on the list here, we have Randy Dobnak, the pitcher for the Twins, who we've talked about, who's had a fantastic start, as well as Jesus Luzardo, a pitcher for the Oakland Athletics at plus 600 and plus 800. Dobnak for the Twins, he's been electric thus far. Brandon McKay, who is out injured for the Rays on the list. Pearson's been out injured. Adele's been fine. So this is really a conversation between Lewis, Robert, and Dobnak when it comes to American League Rookie of the Year. And then it gets into a conversation of offense or pitching because, Dobnak on the pitching side of things, he's still only throwing every 5 days as opposed to Kyle Lewis and Luis Robert, who are out there every day and, affecting their team's chances on a more daily basis. So, last up here, we have the National League Rookie of the Year. This one is Dustin May. It's his race to lose as a pitcher for the Dodgers. He is currently plus 350. When it comes to his odds, he's had a great start early on. He filled in for Clayton Kershaw and then certainly hasn't looked back when it comes to his beginning of the season here. Let me pull up his stats real quick for you guys. Thus far through 2020, he has a 2.79 ERA and a 1-1 record in 6 starts. So hasn't been the beneficiary of any of those wins out there in LA, but has certainly been effective. Next up, you have Jake Cronenworth. He is a name who we touched on, hit one of the grand slams for the Slam Diego Padres on last episode, if you guys were listening. He is certainly making his presence felt, as this is his debut year here. He is hitting .342, 3 home runs, 12 RBIs. He has been a force offensively. He has 8 doubles and 2 triples. So continuing to hit gap to gap, continuing to have power. I think potentially if he finishes where he is right now, he could overtake Dustin May when it comes to the odds and the favorite for the Rookie of the Year position. You also have Mitch Keller of the Pirates, Dylan Carlson of the Cardinals, and Andres Jimenez of the Mets. But I think it's Cronenworth and May in a 2-horse race. And once again, that conversation of hitter to pitcher every day to every 5th day, I think could come down to ultimately who wins the award. But that'll wrap things up for the 3rd segment here of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We'll pause right now for a word from one of our sponsors, but when we come back, we'll wrap up today's episode. It's going to be a lot of fun, everybody. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Welcome back to the 4th and final segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. It is Thursday, August 27th. I appreciate you guys listening in today. We're going to wrap up today's episode talking about what would have been the Major League All-Stars this year. There is no 2020 All-Star game. There's been some chatter of potentially having an All-Star game or a home run derby after the World Series to try to make some money back from what would have been the Midsummer Classic that usually takes place. But unfortunately, no All-Star game. And now that we're pretty much at the halfway point here, I wanted to stop and take a look at ultimately who I think would be the All-Stars at this current time. I tried to do my best to go around and think of a couple of guys at each position for each league and discuss who ultimately I think would be on the squad. Now, you're going to hear some overlap from earlier conversation around Rookie of the Year or Cy Young or All-Stars. So some of these names will be a common theme throughout today's episode, but there are some others on here who we haven't talked about. So let's jump right into it, starting out with the American League. Starting out behind the plate, Salvador Perez of the Kansas City Royals. I believe he would be your starting catcher. This would be the 7th straight All-Star for Salvador Perez. He missed all of 2019 with an injury, bounced back to a solid start this year. He is on the injured list with some vision problems, but he certainly would have been the starter. So if he's out and on the IL, I think potentially we're going to Pedro Severino of the Baltimore Orioles. Of course, Severino, he is helping with the out-of-nowhere offensive breakout from Baltimore. He's hitting .333, and he's had a terrific tandem behind the plate, but he's been carrying it for the most part. So I think you could see Severino starting if Salvador Perez can't make it. Rotating now over to first base, it is a toss-up between Luke Voit and Jose Abreu. Jose Abreu obviously has gotten hot here recently. 11 home runs, .322. Luke Voit, like we touched on, number 1 in OPS in the American League. So whichever one you're going to go to there, I don't think you can get wrong. Those two guys are clearly a cut above everybody else in the American League at first base. And continuing around the diamond, now over to second base, we're going to have Brandon Lowe. He is second right now in American League MVP odds, like we touched on. Hitting over 300, 9 home runs, 25 RBIs. He would be your current starter because DJ LeMahieu of the New York Yankees is currently on the injured list. DJ leading the league in hitting, still hitting .411, over 400 for DJ, but his injury has slowed him down, and I think Brandon Lowe would ultimately get the nod there at second base. Let's see. Next up here, we have the third base position. We are looking at Anthony Rendon at third base. He struggled out of the gate, but has certainly picked it up, and he is all the way up to .326 with 6 home runs and 17 RBIs. He has been fantastic through the first 27 games. This would push him to be the starter over Matt Chapman, who's also had a nice year for the Oakland A's. He's got an .849 OPS, 20 extra base hits. Both of these guys were first-time All-Stars in 2019, so both of them bouncing back with solid years once again and would find themselves back in the Midsummer Classic. Now to the shortstop position, you're looking at Tim Anderson of the Chicago White Sox. Now, he missed a couple of games early on, but he is hitting .350 with 6 home runs and 9 RBIs. His offensive growth has been fantastic. This would lead to his first All-Star nod here in 2020, and his backup would also be a first-time All-Star. It's either Bo Bichette, he would be the first-time All-Star, or potential to have Carlos Correa in this argument as well. Xander Bogaerts potentially could have a conversation around, the Angels' David Fletcher, but ultimately I think you go with Anderson and then Bo Bichette at the shortstop position. Now, transitioning to the outfield, these 3 names are pretty common. You have Mike Trout. He is hitting .262, but does have 10 home runs, 25 RBIs. You have Aaron Judge out there hitting .290 with 9 home runs and 20 RBIs. He's missed a little time with injury as well, but outside of that, he's been fantastic. And Kyle Lewis, the leader for Rookie of the Year in the American League, has been good enough to the point where it would earn him an All-Star start. And then for the 4th outfielder, I think you're going back to the Baltimore Orioles. You're looking at Anthony Santander as potentially being the first reserve off the bench for Baltimore. With the way they're performing and the way he's hitting early on, I think he could earn himself a nod, and that's a name that you probably could have gotten huge odds on before the year started to potentially make the All-Star team. In the designated hitter role, this one's pretty clear-cut. It's Nelson Cruz hitting .340, 11 home runs, 27 RBIs. You could probably have a conversation with Giancarlo Stanton being the replacement there after 6-7 innings for those 2 guys. Maybe Indians Franmil Reyes, maybe Jorge Soler, the Royals. A couple of other guys you could probably have a conversation around, but Cruz is certainly the top dog there, clear-cut. Looking at the starting pitcher in the American League, you're looking at Shane Bieber of the Cleveland Indians. We talked about him being the Cy Young favorite. Behind him, I would personally put Lance Lynn in the rotation, but then you'd also have Dylan Bundy, Garrett Cole, Randy Dobnak. Zach Greinke would probably make it. Dallas Keuchel's been good. Kenta Maeda. And then you're looking at, let's see, those guys would count as relief pitchers in this situation. It doesn't necessarily differentiate, but at the back end of the bullpen, I would probably have Liam Hendricks and Nick Anderson of the Oakland A's and the Tampa Bay Rays as really those 2 shutdown guys on the backside of the bullpen that you could rely on coming out. So it's a pretty loaded squad. I mean, offensively, it is tough to argue with any of these guys in regards to their accolades or the attention they're getting here early on. Voit, Abreu, Lowe, Anderson, all these guys crushing the baseball, and that would be a loaded team in the arms. A lot of starters in the roster, but definitely depth there moving forward. So now looking at the National League, kind of the same drill here for everybody. Behind the dish, we're going to have JT Realmuto. He's off to a hot start. He's hitting .294, 8 home runs, 22 RBIs. He's been one of the best offensive catchers in all of baseball. Behind him, Travis d'Arnaud with the Atlanta Braves. He's got a .948 OPS in 66 at-bats, so he's been a very pleasant surprise behind the dish for those guys in the National League. But it's pretty much those 2 and everybody else, really, when you're looking at the National League side of things. At first base, I have Freddie Freeman. He's hitting .302 with 4 home runs and 70 RBIs. Yes, Paul Goldschmidt has probably been a bit more productive, but his games played hasn't been to the point where I think we can have the actual conversation in regards to backing him up. So I think Anthony Rizzo may get the nod. He did fall in a funk here recently, but has had a solid first half as well. So it's most likely Freeman and Goldschmidt with Rizzo on the outside looking in. Now, the second base position is one where it's a bit outside the box. I mean, on one hand, you have Robinson Cano potentially being the starter there. He's hitting .373, 4 home runs, 13 RBIs. He did spend time on the injured list, but when he's been healthy, it is tough to argue with those statistics. Then you have the guys out in San Francisco. Both guys performing well. Solano, he's been flipping with, can't remember the guy's name now, but you also have Jake Cronenworth of the San Diego Padres in the conversation. He's in the conversation for Rookie of the Year, so it certainly finds himself in the conversation of All-Star as well here in his first season. Continuing around the horn here, looking at third base, Manny Machado. He's hitting .257, 8 home runs, 22 RBIs. He's a plus fielder at third base, putting up some strong offensive numbers for them as well. He's made a couple of highlight level catches, so I think Machado's a solid one. You could also probably look at J.D. Davis of the New York Mets. This would be Machado's 5th selection, but Davis, he's made his mark on the Mets, hitting .295, 417 and 466 across the board for J.D. Davis, as he's had a strong start thus far. Then you're looking at the shortstop position. Of course, that would be Fernando Tatis Jr. So the San Diego Padres would have the left side of the starting infield for the National League All-Star Game. And honestly, guys that should be there for the next 10 years. I mean, we saw Machado's contract. Yes, he does have an opt-out after 5 years, but if they want him back in the way they're performing, I don't think he would want to leave town. It's just a matter of getting what the market dictates for him at that point. But Tatis, under team control for quite some time. He's the MVP thus far, the leader in the clubhouse, hitting .314 with 12 home runs and 29 RBIs. But behind him, you would probably put Trevor Story. Trevor Story has been very good. You got Corey Seager of the Dodgers also in the conversation. Both of those guys hitting right around 300 and a pretty loaded National League West at the shortstop position. So we'll see how those guys finish up the year. But right now, I'd probably give the nod to Trevor Story. Continuing now, going to the outfield in the National League. Some common names that you guys have seen before. Starting out with Bryce Harper, hitting .320, 7 home runs, 19 RBIs. He is certainly in line with his 2015 production on when he won the National League Award. So we're seeing an all-star year as well as a possible MVP season out of Bryce Harper. Next up, you have Mookie Betts, another slam dunk, hitting .300, 11 home runs, 24 RBIs. Perhaps still the best defensive corner outfielder in the game. Got a cannon of an arm and still hitting .300. So you're not going to get any arguments from Mookie Betts. Now, after this, you got a couple of names here, 3 names really for 2 spots. First off, I would put Juan Soto on the list. He's hitting .400 with 7 home runs and 17 RBIs. He missed the first 7 games of the season, but since returning has absolutely hit the cover off the baseball and anything that's coming to him. And then you have Mike Yastrzemski with the Giants, who has been an absolute star out there for San Francisco. He's got the highest wins above replacement in Major League Baseball. His WAR is currently 2.2, which would put him first in the league. So tough to argue against that statistic. And last, you have Charlie Blackmon, the guy who was almost hitting .500. He's gotten a bit cooler now. He's all the way down to .394 it is, but still an extremely hot start for Charlie Blackmon to not make an all-star team, hitting like .700 over the course of almost a month. Would be fascinating to kind of see that fall off. On the designated hitter side of things, we're going to go to Cincinnati. We got Jesse Winkler. He's hitting .315, 6 home runs, 10 RBIs. He was a former highly rated prospect that's finally starting to figure things out here as he's reached his age 27 season. And then behind him, I would have Dominic Smith of the New York Mets. He's been solid thus far. Yes, he's been in the outfield more than he's been at second base. Or a designated hitter, I'm sorry. He's been in the outfield more than the DH role, but still, put him in the DH, and his slash line of right at .300 is something to possibly write in there on the ballot. On the pitching side of things for the National League, coming in here, the starter. It's tough to go against Jacob deGrom, but there are a handful of solid options here. I mean, again, deGrom, multiple-time Cy Young winner, multiple All-Star. Really not going to get a tough argument from anybody there, but in regards to kind of pure stuff and excellence in 2020, it'd be tough to go against Trevor Bauer of the Cincinnati Reds. You could also look at Max Fried of the Atlanta Braves, who has the lowest ERA currently in the National League. You have Yu Darvish at 6-0, who has been outstanding his past couple of times out there. It's tough to go against a hotter pitcher than that. Other guys who I think would be on the roster include Kyle Freeland from Colorado. You have Josh Hader from Milwaukee as one of the key relievers. You also have Kenley Jansen, I think, would make the squad. Dinelson Lamet from San Diego, Sonny Gray, maybe Aaron Nola from the Philadelphia Phillies as a representative outside of JT and Bryce, kind of the top three guys there in Philadelphia. But looking across the board here at the National League, I'm favoring the American League in this division pretty hard. I mean, first base, Freeman, Goldschmidt, very good. Cano, not so much at second base. Tatis Jr.'s been excellent. Machado, Realmuto, Winkler. But you're looking at the American League of Voit, Abreu, Lowe, Anderson, Rendon, Perez, Trout, Judge. I think the American League's depth would certainly make them favorites in this matchup. Now, the National League side of things with their pitching could be the ultimate equalizer. You would have to look at Yu Darvish, deGrom, Bauer against the likes of Bieber, Lynn, Hendricks, and those guys. So I do like the National League depth on the pitching side of things to possibly be the equalizer, but the offensive aspect of these lineups would certainly favor the American League. So if you're a pitching guy, maybe put your money on the National League on this fictional game I'm talking about. But if you're an offensive guy, you got to like what the American League is running out there. But those are my all-stars. Yeah, it wasn't a full roster. There's probably some more backups, maybe some more relief pitchers that may have been on. Who do you guys think I missed out there? Running through these names quickly here on Wednesday night. I certainly appreciate you guys tuning in. That was a lot of fun. A lot of crossover from MVP, Cy Young, Rookie of the Year conversation. But a few names in there we typically don't discuss. So it was nice to kind of do that exercise with you guys here. But that'll wrap things up for today's episode of the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Once again, do me a favor, head to social media. Check out GSMC Baseball Podcast on Facebook and Twitter, as well as the GSMC Podcast Network across all platforms, LinkedIn, Facebook, all of that stuff. Leave a 5-star rating, write a review, click the 3 buttons down there, hit share, text this to one of your buddies who's a baseball fan. Continue to spread the word. We certainly appreciate it here within the Baseball Podcast. But that'll wrap it up for episode number 253 of the Baseball Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. As always, have yourselves a great weekend, everybody. I'll talk to you again on Monday.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.